honey trap murders, and international manhunts. When 33-year-old Mario Phetmang suddenly disappeared after a night out, family and friends scrambled to find him. It began with this surveillance footage, and ended with this terrifying figure, and several secrets that nobody knew about. Meanwhile, and almost 5,000 miles away, when 16-year-old Ben suddenly disappeared from his mother's home in Thailand, investigators would find more than one terrible tragedy. But was his girlfriend part of an evil plot, or simply another victim? Today, we are going international by looking at two stories that originate from Thailand. Stories that involve the United Kingdom, Australia, and America. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks, and welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime. My name is Adrian, and today we're doing something a little bit different by looking at two stories in one video. Now, both of these stories are very recent, and I can pretty much guarantee that you've not heard of either of them. But for those who want to know, the timestamp for the first video is here, and for the second one, here. By the way, if you want to see more dark stories and true crime, then please make sure you're subscribed. Thank you. Alright, and now that said, please pull up a seat and grab yourself a coffee. Let's begin with the case of Mario Phetmang. G'day folks, and welcome to Sydney. Now, this place once again needs no introduction. With Sydney Harbour Bridge, Bondi Beach, and the world-famous Sydney Opera House, it is no wonder why this place is recognised as one of the world's most iconic cities. Now, personally, I would love to hike through the Blue Mountains, which can be found west of the city, and give me a few months and I'm sure I will too. Our first case today takes us about 10 miles west of Sydney CBD to the suburbs of Sydney Olympic Park. Formerly known as Homebush Bay, Sydney Olympic Park was renamed for, well, you guessed it, the Olympics, which, for those of you who don't remember, took place in Sydney at the turn of the new millennia. With so many sports facilities, it is no surprise to learn that the population is relatively small here due to the lack of housing available. Only 5,000 people live here, and even fewer when you go back to 2018 when this case occurred. Most of those found in Olympic Park are merely passing through it, with the A3 and M4 serving as major arteries to the city's western suburbs. And it was along the banks of the A3, also known as Homebush Bay Drive, that one of those passing by came across a horrific discovery. At around 10:30 PM on June 5th, 2018, a truck driver working for the Australian Post encountered a mechanical failure which required him to pull over. After pulling into the emergency lane of the A3 nearby Centennial Park, the driver noticed a foul smell lingering in the air, and after following his nose to the foliage nearby, he came across a terrible sight. A body was wrapped in what appeared to be a mattress protector, but what really gave it away was a pair of feet poking out from the plastic sheet, and, judging by the smell, they had been there for quite a while. Police officers were immediately called to the crime scene, and the emergency lane and surrounding park were sectioned off for examination. However, as with most cases, identification would take some time.
Police have revealed more details about the body found dumped beside Homebush Bay Drive. We now know that it belongs to a man and was found wrapped in material. It was a broken down truck driver who made the discovery at about 10:30 last night. It was in damp and dark bushland. Police were quickly on the scene and had to move the body immediately to the Glebe morgue to try to preserve some of that evidence. It's now undergoing an autopsy, and it's hoped that will help detectives identify the man who didn't have any belongings on him nor any ID. Until then, though, police need the public's help to fill in the gaps.
We strongly require the assistance of the public to identify this individual and how he came to be on the side of the road at Homebush.
The body was found beside Homebush Bay Drive, one of Western Sydney's busiest roads, so police want drivers to check their dash cams from last night and over the past few days. Also, if anyone has concerns about a missing loved one, they're urged to contact Crime Stoppers.
Back at the crime scene, officers did not have much to go off of. With this road being so busy, the chances of identifying his killer was almost as realistic as finding a needle in a haystack. Nevertheless, New South Wales Police Department urged all motorists who were driving through the area in recent days to please check their dash cams, just in case they'd inadvertently recorded something suspicious. Over the following days, a post-mortem examination revealed that the victim had been severely assaulted, with blunt force trauma labelled as the leading cause of death. In addition to this, the autopsy report also noted that the man had been bound and gagged with a t-shirt before being wrapped up in plastic. While scouring the crime scene, detectives would also find a leather boot near the body, which, by the way, would become a key piece of evidence later on in this story. And although they didn't have much to go off initially, they were just about to find out who the victim was too. Fast forward a couple of days, and our victim was identified as a 33-year-old man named Mario Phetmang. Affectionately nicknamed as Mario by loved ones, Mario was a permanent resident of Australia, residing in the nearby suburb of Hurstville. Born in the year 1985, he moved to Australia when he was 23 years old. In the early days, he lived with his aunt until he was able to establish himself. But before moving to Australia, he obtained a bachelor's degree while he lived with his mother, Vipada, in Thailand. After working at a spa, he eventually moved on to work at a Starbucks as a manager during the daytime, and occasionally at a Thai restaurant in the evenings. By the time that this story takes place, Mario had fully established himself in Australia. Not only was he married to his wife named Rajira, but he also had countless friends through the many jobs and hobbies around Sydney. At the time of his death, he had lived in Australia for just over 10 years and was well acquainted with the city's vibrant lifestyle. So, when those who knew him found out about his death, every single one of them was shocked. None of his friends or loved ones believed that he had any enemies whatsoever, or even knew anyone capable of doing such a savage thing. So surely his murder was made by an absolute stranger, right? Well, it turns out that Mario was actually a very mysterious man. In fact, he had more than one big secret to him. And unfortunately for him, all of this would be revealed shortly after his death. So let's talk about the first secret that has nothing to do with his death, but Mario was actually bisexual. You see, despite having a wife and supposedly being happily married, he also had a boyfriend in the city, one that his wife had no idea about. According to multiple sources, his boyfriend was actually just down the road, and the two of them would routinely meet up whenever he had free time. But the other secret of his was far more dangerous. You see, Mario considered himself to be somewhat of a small-time drug dealer, and he would routinely sell methamphetamine on the streets to help fund his lifestyle. Now, his wife and his family had no idea about any of these two big secrets, and so you can likely imagine the shock they must have felt when they found out what he was doing in his spare time. But saying that, a couple of Mario's friends did actually suspect that he may have been a drug dealer. I mean, put quite bluntly, he was buying way too many luxury items to be just a Starbucks manager. But alas, no one believed he was even capable of hurting another person. According to his family, friends, and everyone else who knew him, he was sweet, gentle, and kind, and definitely not the type of person to be dabbling in the drug industry. It didn't take long for investigators to uncover more information about his death either, and one of their first clues came in the form of surveillance footage. At 7:28 PM in the evening of May the 25th, 2018, a surveillance camera located at a 7-Eleven shop in South Hurstville captured Mario walking into the store with another man close behind. It was soon determined that the two must know each other, but were trying to seem unrelated in front of the obvious cameras, leading detectives to believe that he was likely Mario's associate. Undisclosed surveillance footage also showed Mario's associate making 3 attempts to withdraw money from the store's ATM machine, but ultimately was unsuccessful. Now, surely that was not part of the plan here, but shortly after that, the two left the store and then disappeared. Officers soon learned that the man that Mario was with was 40-year-old Alex Dion. And the interesting thing here is that he also now seemed to be missing. With their newly found knowledge of Mario's drug dealings, they believed that perhaps this could have been a drug deal gone wrong. And this is where the story becomes even more concerning. Because several miles away and just north of Sydney, a construction worker was just about to discover a very perplexing package. His assignment on a new property, which was currently being built, required him to perform some routine checks on the water tank. But after making his way over to inspect that water tank, he noticed that something was inside it. Peering in, he saw a bag that was filled with clothes, a metal bar, and 2 tire irons. and after taking a closer look, he realized that the clothes found within had blood all over them. No surprise, he called the authorities immediately. When officers investigating Mario's case caught wind of this information, they were quick to realize that Alex had, in fact, been working on that very same property the week prior. You see, Alex was a tiler, so he would have needed several days at that house. And now, suddenly, this was all looking a little too suspicious for him. When they tried to contact Alex for questioning, they were, no surprise, met with silence. And after stopping by his property, well, more bad news. His neighbors confirmed that they hadn't seen him in over a week. In addition to this, several neighbors came forward to the officers to claim that they had seen him washing his car with a high-pressure hose in the early morning hours before he disappeared. With this in mind, the New South Wales Police Department held a news conference to seek the public's help in Mario's case. And while doing this, they quietly revealed some evidence on Alex to see how he would react. But before we continue this case, who precisely is Alex Dion? Well, unfortunately, not a huge amount is known about him, but there are a few details. So Alex was actually a US citizen who only lived in Sydney for work. He was a married man with a wife and 2 children, all of which lived back in the US and California. What he was doing in Sydney wasn't particularly clear. However, he had established himself for a couple of years now. After being in a horrific car accident a year prior, he was left with both chronic pain and discomfort. And so, as a result, he turned to methamphetamine to help cope with that pain. It was already known that he had connections with another drug dealer who, in that time, had been arrested. So it's likely that Alex then moved over to Mario to find new supply. So, we have a man who takes methamphetamine, who is caught on surveillance camera with a drug dealer who is now dead, and he failed to withdraw cash from the ATM for those drugs. All of this is slowly starting to make sense now, don't you think? Ironically, Alex would contact the authorities before they had the chance to track him down, but he was actually nowhere near them anymore. In fact, he was all the way over in San Diego. He told the police that he believed that it was his housemate and friend who had killed Mario. But when asked if he had Mario's phone number and credit cards, he did admit to taking them to America with him. And that wasn't great news for officers, who now had even more questions than when they began. However, before they could even establish a more permanent connection with Alex, he had instead hung up on them, never to call again. So, let's talk about what actually happened, starting from the very beginning. After losing his previous supplier, Alex got in touch with Mario to see if he could sort out some methamphetamine. That is when the two arranged to meet at a local 7-Eleven store in Hurstville, which of course is where this surveillance footage was captured. The surveillance camera shows that Alex couldn't withdraw any cash required to pay Mario, which of course created a problem for their deal. So Alex's plan B was rather simple. He decided to rob Mario instead. He invited him back to his apartment where he promised he had the money. As a result, the two of them then travelled back to his place, with Mario as a passenger. That is when, unfortunately, he was mercilessly battered across the head, sustaining very significant trauma and more than 24 head injuries in the process, which, of course, ultimately caused his death. Alex then ripped up his t-shirt, using it to tie Mario up, before wrapping his body in a mattress protector and placing it in the back of his Hyundai Terracan SUV. After that, he then drove around the city, smoking all of the ice he had stolen. He eventually found himself on Homebush Bay Drive, where he callously dumped the body, discarding only one of Mario's leather boots in the process. He then dumped his bloody clothing, amongst other items, at the construction site he was working at in the days prior. Blood had found its way into the boot and exterior of his car, forcing Alex to pressure wash the vehicle in the middle of the night. The commotion caused others living nearby to notice what he was doing, which was another vital clue which helped the police to pin him down. In an erratic state after consuming a bunch of methamphetamine and also, murdering someone, Alex called his wife in the United States and told her that he had found himself in trouble. Now, of course, he wasn't going to tell her that he had just murdered someone. Instead, he claimed that he was being targeted by rogue drug dealers and that his life was in danger. This quite clearly panicked her, and so as a result, she bought him a flight ticket back home, scheduled to leave that night. Now, because she was the one to buy him a ticket, it was less evident that he had fled the country. However, officers would eventually find this image of Alex at the airport. But before leaving, Alex had one more trick up his sleeve. He used Mario's phone to text his housemate to organize a drug deal that would never take place, in what was a crude attempt to implicate his friend in the murder. Real slimy stuff. And so, only 24 hours after Mario's death, Alex was gone. He boarded a one-way flight to the United States, flying home to San Diego via Honolulu. Believe it or not, but shortly after arriving in the United States, he then tried to use Mario's card 3 times to get money, but again failing to acquire the cash that he so desperately wanted to blow on ice. By the time Alex became a blip on detectives' radars, he was already long gone. And unfortunately, his arrest warrant would take quite some time too. 3 months later, in September of 2018, it was finally issued. And with Australia and the US cooperating in an extradition treaty, they could thankfully demand him back with notice. You know, maybe if Alex had kept his head down for a while, then he could have outrun the American authorities. But due to his own stupid actions, it was actually effortless to find him. He was already behind bars on a domestic violence charge in San Diego. And so, after completing that charge, he was extradited to Australia on April 14, 2019, where he was then arrested immediately after arriving in Sydney. And so, with Alex now in their hands, he was at the full mercy of the law. So, how do you think he pleaded? Not guilty, of course. He told officers that not only had he not murdered Mario, but he was not responsible for any of his injuries either. In addition to this, he would once again tell officers that he believed that his housemate was the one to murder Mario. And the reason why he was framed? Well, that's because he secretly fancied his girlfriend. Alex would also claim that his barbaric housemate forced him to dispose of the body, and that, for whatever reason, he had to do it naked. However, several parts to his story were simply not adding up to the evidence stacking against him. Namely the part where he told officers that Mario was with his housemate at the gas station. His bogus testimony aside, other articles of evidence make his involvement almost irrefutable. I mean, for one, the shirt he had worn on the night he murdered Mario, which was also picked up on surveillance footage, was the very shirt found in Mario's mouth when his body was discovered. In addition to this, the leather boot found under his body matched another leather boot found in Alex's apartment, clearly proving that Mario was inside of his home. Mario's DNA was also found on the wall of Alex's garage where he washed his vehicle, and phone records show that the two were in contact with each other throughout the entire day before he died. Now, Alex did admit that he intended to buy $900 worth of methamphetamine from Mario. However, as we know, his debit cards were then declined at the service station. And although he claimed that he didn't kill Mario, he did admit that he was the one who disposed of his body, saying, quote, "I was very embarrassed to tell any person what I had done. It was embarrassing to tell the truth." Yeah, no shit, Alex. While in court, the prosecution argued that Alex deliberately caused very serious injuries to Mario, in which resulted in his death. This included 27 soft tissue injuries to his head and fractures to his skull, which usually are inflicted with a high degree of force. There was one forensic pathologist who suggested that the extensive head injuries that Mario had suffered could have been caused by him falling over. However, other pathologists rebuffed these claims, saying that this would require Mario to fall onto a raised object, and then stand up, and then fall down several more times to injure different parts of his head. They also argued that there was no evidence to suggest the injuries were caused in self-defense, or that Alex had help from any other parties. In the end, the jury found him guilty of the murder of Mario Phetmang. He was therefore sentenced to 25 years in jail, with a non-parole period of 18 years and 9 months. This means that, with time served, Alex will be eligible for parole in September of 2043, which sounds like a very long time away if you ask me. During his sentencing, the judge said, Mr. Phetmang was dumped in a sad and pitiful resting place in a contemptuous manner, with about as much respect as would be afforded by a piece of rubbish. One constant in all of the descriptions of Woramet Taoto was that he was a peaceful and non-violent person. From the time he realized that he'd been lured into a trap in the underground car park until he lost consciousness, he would have been terrified. And your tears at the sentencing hearing are insufficient to demonstrate remorse. And so, with all said and done, Alex is now behind bars where he will stay for the next couple of decades. Meanwhile, Mario is gone and will never have the opportunity to experience life again. His aunt told the Supreme Court that she regrets bringing her nephew to Australia, while his mother said she knows in her heart that he was a good person and that he always treated his parents with gratitude. She further said that she is tortured by her only son's horrific death and struggles to understand why it happened. In her own words, she said, "I miss my son so much. Nowadays, I live as if I can only breathe to survive. I'm like a dead person while still alive." His wife said that, while loving Mario may not have been the easiest task in the world sometimes, she loves him now and forever. You know, stories like this always come with some form of mild internal conflict. I mean, I feel terrible for Mario, as all of us should. He never deserved to die. But this is one of the many reasons why you should not stick your nose in drugs. Unfortunately, some addicts will murder for supply, and Mario, he had it. I do really hope that his family and friends are recovering from this terrible story. And now, with that said, it's time to move on to the next one. Our next case takes us to the same country in which Mario was born, and of course, I'm talking about Thailand. But unfortunately, the ending to this is just as tragic. So the information around this story is a little more limited to what we normally cover here in Coffeehouse Crime, hence why this is a much shorter story. But the information available will absolutely terrify you. And so, without further ado, please grab yourself another coffee. This is the case of Woramet Taoto. Welcome to Thailand, folks. Now, we have been here a few times before on the channel, but unlike our previous stories, all of which have happened on the southern islands, today we are travelling to the northern and mountainous region of Chiang Mai. It's a place that I've been to myself on more than one occasion, and Chiang Mai has a very special place in my heart. To name a few amazing things, it is brimming with waterfalls, ancient cities, bustling markets, and incredible wildlife. Saying that, the rules and regulations for animal welfare are not the best here, so please do your research before you spend money to see tigers and elephants. This place is seriously beautiful though, and honestly, I hope to return for a third visit sometime in the future. But enough about that. Let's talk about a case that disrupted the area's peace and tranquility. Travel southeast of Chiang Mai and you will soon find a city named Lampang. With a population of 60,000 people, it is a lot quieter than its larger neighbours, that being Chiang Mai and Chiang Rai. Rainforests, mountains, rivers and lakes surround the area, and it's a place where you could easily disappear if you wanted to. Lampang also faces very aggressive weather conditions, with temperatures reaching up to 44 degrees Celsius or 111 degrees Fahrenheit during their summers. Cast yourself back a little over a year ago to the start of 2023, and one of those living here was a young man named Woramet Taoto. Woramet also had the nickname Ben, so for the rest of this video we're going to refer to him by his nickname. Now Ben was a dual national, having a British father named Steve and a Thai mother named Oi. It was in the year 2000 that Steve and Oi fell in love with each other, with Steve eventually moving to Thailand to help pursue the relationship. Fast forward 4 years, and they had built a beautiful home in the countryside, got married, and had a baby boy named Ben. Ben would often stand out among his friends as a toddler with thanks to his blonde hair. He was a cheeky boy who loved football and could speak both Thai and English. Now, unfortunately, the two would eventually divorce, leaving Ben right in the middle. He would ultimately remain with his mother in Lampang, while his father made the rather difficult decision to return to England. But regardless, Steve would visit his son quite often. He recognized the quality of Ben's life was better in Thailand with his mother and the friends he had made. Now Ben was 16 years old at the time that this case took place, but despite his age, he was already quite the character. It is clear through the many photos and videos of him online that he highly valued off-road biking. In fact, it looks like he was really into the sport. As a proud rider and member of the Sop Prap Motorcycle Club, he would go on to win several motocross trophies and hoped to, one day, open up his own motorbike repair garage. And through other photos, it seems that he was also quite the plant enthusiast and loved his puppy. But there was a dodgy side to Ben too. Unknown to his parents, he was actually buying and selling drugs in the area. In fact, he was actually quite vocal about it too, as you can see through his many translated Facebook posts. Which, if you ask me, is quite a bold move, to say the least. But Ben was very well loved. With many friends, 2 families, a bunch of motorbike fans, and even 2 girlfriends, he was never alone. He was known to be bright, vocal, and very expressive. The kind of guy that would never be quiet. So, you can probably imagine when, on May the 6th, 2023, family and friends were very concerned when he suddenly fell silent. Now, to begin with, nobody knew where Ben had gone. But after a while, Ben's mother realized that her scooter was missing from the garage, and so she assumed he must have taken it somewhere. So, with that in mind, she contacted many of his friends, but after realizing that nobody knew where he was, she decided to call the authorities instead. After contacting the authorities, officers were quick to find this surveillance footage. Now, the concerning clue here is that he was with one of his girlfriends named Suripichaya Kamsa, who had the nickname Ping Pong. They drove together on a road they would usually take to see her grandfather, who lived just outside of the city. After a little digging around and asking questions, the Thai police soon confirmed that they had spent time with her grandfather before dropping off his other girlfriend Yam back home. Yam told the officers that Ben and Ping Pong had planned to meet a man in the forest, though she didn't know what for. Now, she assumed it probably had something to do with drugs, but she herself wasn't certain. But this was all the officers needed to go down a new rabbit hole, and that is when they found this surveillance footage. A small glimpse of his scooter travelling into the darkness at 7:18 PM. So Yam was telling the truth. They seemed to be heading out of town for something. This information was highly troubling to officers. Ben and Ping Pong, who were both 16 years old, had left the city in the middle of the night to potentially carry out a drug run, and now both of them were missing. Sadly, it wouldn't take long for their worries to turn into absolute devastation, because only one day later, on May the 7th, Ben's body was found in a grove along a twisting country lane less than 4 miles away from the village. It became clear that he had sustained severe injuries resembling blunt force trauma across his head, with many cuts across his face. And, as you can see from this video, his mother arrived soon after the discovery. Officers had reported that the teenager's phone and cash were missing from his shoulder bag and suggested that he may have been robbed. They believe he was killed elsewhere and then left in the woods, as there were no signs of struggle where his body was found. Thai media reported that Ben's body was found by a garbage collector who was at work on the Sunday morning. He was found with his back against a tree, wearing a black long-sleeve t-shirt and jeans. This terrible discovery was gut-wrenching and painful for all of those who knew Ben, with his mother at the centre of all of it. And his father, who was situated back here in the UK, now faced this agony halfway across the world. No surprise, he booked the next flight to Thailand. Whenever a child disappears, most parents are faced with the terrible anxiety of never seeing them again. Now, statistically, most of them will return unscathed. However, in Ben's case, it was the worst possible outcome. To add to this tragedy, there was more confusion and mystery. I mean, of course, most people wanted to know who killed Ben. But the other question was, where was Ping Pong? As you know through the surveillance footage, Ben and Ping Pong had left together the night prior. But now only one of them had been found, and the motorbike was still missing. But before officers could answer any of those questions themselves, they suddenly received an unexpected breakthrough. After catching wind that a man was seen driving a motorcycle without a license plate merely hours after Ben disappeared, officers decided to hone in to see if they could find out any more information. And that is when an anonymous person came forward to point out that the man, who was named Chaiwat Bungarin, had actually driven his black Honda motorcycle to his relative's property that night. The same bike seen in the surveillance footage. And not only that, but he was with a young woman who seemed to match the exact description of Ping Pong. And so, after learning about this information, officers swiftly decided to inspect the property, where, lo and behold, they found the bike abandoned behind a cowshed. This was enough for officers to pull Chaiwat in for questioning, and by the evening of May the 9th, he was reined in to his local police station. Now, Chaiwat Bungaran was already known to officers, but for all of the wrong reasons. Putting a slew of minor crimes aside, he was also recently released from prison after serving time for multiple sex crimes. So, put quite bluntly, there is nothing good about this 44-year-old thug. In fact, his only redeeming quality came from his own confession, and sadly, he did admit to murdering Ben. It turns out that Ping Pong and Ben were allegedly drug runners for Chaiwat, who would supply them with drugs to then sell on to other customers. Well, according to the older man, Ben had apparently stolen from him, and when he found out, he became absolutely enraged. Now, in a sudden twist to the story, and according to multiple sources, some people even believe that Ping Pong had lured Ben to Chaiwat in some sort of honey trap situation. But it is quite difficult to know if this is true or not. I mean, Ping Pong and Ben had known each other ever since childhood, so if she did sign up to this, it would be truly evil of her. And to add to the entirely gross and messy situation, it is believed that Chaiwat and Ping Pong were frequently having sex. Now obviously, 15 and 44 are not two numbers you should put together. So, Chaiwat would also admit that after meeting Ben and Ping Pong, he did in fact murder him with a large wooden plank, claiming that it was a drug deal gone wrong. But he would also claim that he did not touch Ping Pong, because apparently she fled while he was being beaten to death. By the way, it is also worth noting that Chaiwat merely claims that Ben stole drugs from him, and this is not proven whatsoever. And we can't believe a single word he says either, because only 2 days after claiming that he hadn't touched Ping Pong, and that apparently she must be alive and well, some more bad news came in. On May the 13th, Ping Pong's body was found in a shallow grave buried in a woodland just off the main north-south highway near Lampang. It is worth noting that she was only 2 miles away from where Ben's body was found. Her parents and grandparents identified her body at the scene from the braces on her teeth and the jewellery she had been wearing. They broke down in tears when it emerged that their daughter had in fact been murdered. There were signs of bruising on her face, and it is expected that she was hit with a solid object until she died. It is also worth noting this is the same way that Ben was murdered. Now, although this heavily implied that Chaiwat was the murderer, his own tone drastically changed after this. You see, Chaiwat did admit to killing Ben, but he strongly denied murdering Ping Pong. And while all of this was going on, even more drama was unfolding. Just hours after flying to Thailand from the UK, Steve would find himself face to face with Chaiwat. The bizarre encounter, which took place during a police reconstruction, ended in Steve screaming at Chaiwat, shouting, "Look at me in the eye, you bastard."
Look at me in the eye. Look at me in the eye, you.
In fact, there was plenty of time for him to say many things to his son's murderer, and you can see here just how mad he and the others were.
Look at me! Look at me, you. No, you can't look because you're a coward! Look at me! Yeah.
While Steve and Oi are struggling to come to terms with the loss of their son, they are determined to understand what happened to him, and desperately want to know the truth. As of the date of this video being posted, Chaiwat has not yet been tried for either of the murders. But if you ask me, it is quite obvious what will come of it. There will be many key witnesses and articles of evidence against him, and one of those testifying will be the local garbage collector who has already shared how he found Ben while he was out collecting bottles. As said before, the leading theory by Thai investigators is that Ben had become caught up in a drug deal, and that, sadly, he was lured to his death in the forest. If Chaiwat is convicted of murdering Ben, then he will be given a life sentence behind bars. However, if he is convicted of killing 2 children, that including Ping Pong, then he will be executed. So this is probably why he admits to murdering Ben, but consistently denies to murdering Ping Pong. Interesting side note here, but Thai authorities conduct executions via firing squad. To be honest, it is probably cheaper than the more modern injection approach. When being asked about the murder and speaking to Thai and British media, Steve stated, "He will never see the light of day again. Either he will die of old age in prison, be killed there, or be executed. He deserves whatever he gets. He is a waste of breath. It is just such a waste of young life. Ben was such a joy, and I loved him so much. I thought this place was paradise when I first came here. I could have never imagined that something so terrible could happen here." As of the time of this video being posted, Chaiwat Bungaran remains in custody in the Mai Tai district, awaiting trial.
I've tried in the last few days to articulate the pain I'm in. And I can't. I'm in immeasurable pain. But it's also for his mum. It's just a case of taking each day as it comes and dealing with it and moving somehow forward. But at the moment we are in real pain.
Honestly, this story is just absolutely terrible through and through. Here we have two young kids who lost their lives for, apparently, a thug getting upset at losing drugs. I think I'm with Ben's father on this one. This guy deserves the absolute worst for him. If there are any updates, of course I'll let you know as soon as possible. The trial is expected either later this year or in 2025. And yeah, for now that's the end of the case, folks, and therefore the end of the video. Before I go though, I've got a couple questions for you here. The first one is, do you think that Alex received the time he deserved for murdering Mario? And secondly, what do you think should happen to Chaiwat? As usual, please let me know in the comments section down below, and thank you so much for making it this far in this video. I really do appreciate you being here. If you'd like to support me in the channel, then please do consider subscribing, or check out my Patreon here, or my social media here, most notably my Instagram. And just on a personal note, but yeah, these are very strange times for me, folks. If I timed this video correctly, I'm actually moving to the other side of the world in just under 2 days. So, yeah, to say I'm terrified is, yeah, an understatement. Saying that, I am also extraordinarily excited for what's happening in the future. And by the way, there are plenty of plans for Coffeehouse crime and beyond after I move. England's been great, I've been here for about 2 decades now, but it's time to move on and start the next chapter of my life. And of course, I'll be taking Coffeehouse crime and Nero with me. This is getting very personal, but this has been a dream of mine for about 13 or 14 years now. Honestly, I just simply can't wait. So, for anyone living in Melbourne, Australia, you might see me in a coffee shop sometime soon. Anyway, please wish me luck, and yeah, I'm still posting once a week because I have a backlog. Anyway folks, thank you so much for watching today, and as always, I'll see you again very soon for another video. Until that moment arrives though, remember to look after yourself, look after each other, and of course, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.